Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. I'm joined today by Dacia Toll, who is the co-CEO of a company called Course Mojo. Dacia, welcome to Trending in Education.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
You know, it's always a treat when I know someone because I was producing their episode for another podcast. Shout out to David Adams and Innovations in Education, his podcast, where I already got a taste of what Dacia can do in a podcast interview. I know it's good, no pressure. But before we get into like what you're doing now, we'll talk about AI. There'll be chatbots. Hold your horses, folks. There'll be chatbots. But before we get to the chatbots, we want to get to know the humans in the conversation, starting with you, Dacia. You have an interesting backstory. You've worn different hats kind of across the education ecosystem.
Well, I am feeling like the backstory is getting longer. It's my 26th year in education.
Wow.
And I started as a teacher and principal in New Haven, Connecticut, where I still live. And I had that very special experience of being part of a founding team of a new school when we had a vision for what we thought was possible and then the ability to go after it and make it happen. Thankfully, that school, which I was the principal of, was ultimately really successful. The kids did well, and we were oversubscribed. So then
this was kind of like a pioneering time in edtech. Edtech wasn't even really a thing. It was kind of emerging, and the idea that technology could actually like help power solutions.
You should talk candidly about the last 30 years of edtech, but where I think mostly, unfortunately, it has been about overpromising and under-delivering.
Yeah.
I do think AI has the potential for significantly more powerful products if we bring our values and lessons learned and define differently, both the what and how, but we can get to that. But to go back to 1999, which is when we started this school, it actually was not a technology. There was no real technology focused bent to it. We were concerned about the things that I think we should still be concerned about, which is quality instruction and great teachers and a strong culture and community. And we were also very interested in extracurriculars and leadership opportunities for students.
Yep.
So that one school over the course of 22 years became 41 schools. And it's, will always be one of the great joys of my life that my job. It certainly didn't feel like a job. My own biological kids, at some point along the way, I got married and had kids, and they went to the school that I had helped to create. And
hang on, Dacia, if I hear you right, your biological kids went to your pedagogical kids? I don't know, I'm just spitballing.
Well, it gets better because a number of the students who went to the middle school where I was principal, and then the high school that we founded to sort of continue the journey with them, ended up coming back and serving as employees. One of them was my personal assistant for a number of years, like my assistant. And several of them taught my own children. And then it just felt like, when you do anything like that in a sustained way, in a sustained community, which for us was, we went from New Haven to Bridgeport to Hartford to Brooklyn, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. But that was it. It was really a cluster of communities all within driving distance of where I lived. It was a very powerful, like we talked about being a team and a family.
Yeah.
And I have so many relationships with folks I had the pleasure of working with who I consider friends, and these that we served like 5 or 6 of their children.
Perfect.
So it was great.
Yeah. It's cool that it's both a story of scaling, but also a story of like community building, culture building, where like I think lots of times people assume scale is almost an impersonal, like kind of disconnected kind of thing. I know there's like the rule of 150 from Gore-Tex where there's a certain size you can't really maintain beyond, but it seems like you were still, even though you'd grown, you were still you could kind of know everyone and everyone would know you.
Well, I don't know if it was that point, but I knew a lot of people and we were geographically proximate. Part of it is a lot of us did this work for a long time.
Yeah.
So we sustained in the work and in community. And then what we figured out is we needed a great principal at every single school. And then that principal could build teams that created that community within theirs.
It was a moment in time, I think, in educational reform in K-12. There was kind of like a movement and like sort of stuff happened. And it was also coinciding with like Web 1 and or 2.0, like early iterations of like the technology platforms that could kind of power it, which is where I was coming at it from while I was working at Kaplan. It was a pioneering time. And then you've continued to kind of expand beyond that initial
Achievement First
achievement first.
was the network of schools. And then now Course Mojo. You know, when you come up on 20 years with any organization, I think you have to ask yourself, like, what's best for this organization I love? I think there are beautiful things about founder-led organizations. There's also uniquely dysfunctional things about founder-led organizations. And it was clear to me, well, I probably could have done that job forever. And it was time for AF to have a new chapter, which is exciting. They're off to the races. And then I wanted to go solve some of the big problems that felt hard to solve as the leader of a single system of schools. And I'm super excited. I think we're doing that now. It's still early days, but you know, I'd sort of led through COVID and bringing kids back to school.
Right.
And I sort of thought that the hard part would be over. And I think what we all quickly realized is the hard part was really addressing the needs of both students and staff after this incredible disruption. And there's some data on, you know, we're very focused on middle school students and achievement and teachers. And before COVID, there was already like the differentiation challenge that we know has always existed, where used to be there was a 5 grade level span between the most struggling reader in the classroom and the most advanced reader. After COVID, there's now a 7 grade level span. To be multilingual learner mostly meant Spanish speaker. Now we have a wide variety of multilingual learners. We've unfortunately seen so many talented educators leave the classroom. And at the same time, we've raised the expectations for the rigor of the curriculum with the adoption of all of these high quality instructional materials and an appropriate emphasis on the rigor of the text and the task. And the authenticity and sophistication of writing. And so we have higher expectations for what we want students to learn and be able to do. We have kids who are further behind and more varied. And we have a lot of newer teachers. And I just sort of existentially worried about how challenging that is right now. And worried that if we don't do something to make it more effective and easier, that we run the risk of losing even more talented educators and having kids slip even further behind. And I think, unfortunately, you know, again, we're very focused on the ELA on reading side. And if you look at NAEP scores, I mean, it's a national emergency.
It was before, and it's like worse, you know, like it's not getting better, and the baselines are just, we're kind of stuck. And then the interventions are, you know, the likelihood in light of the new cuts that are happening is that even being able to track this data reliably moving forward is kind of suspect. So it's almost like we're lost in the wilderness to some extent, which is kind of, you know, we look for rays of hope on this podcast though. And then one of them, I think, is actually, what can this new wave of technology, AI specifically, do to help address some of the gaps and perhaps provide some of that differentiated learning, some of that personalization that's been something, you know, I was talking about it, you know, around the same time you were doing Achievement First is when I was doing a lot of e-learning for Kaplan. And it's like, you want to leverage what's new and emerging and just do so in a way that's sort of thoughtful and critical, because there are a lot of risks around doing it wrong. Can you talk through what led you to make the move? And maybe we could hear a little more about what Course Mojo is and the problems it's trying to address. But, you know, it seems like you're kind of moving into some of the more cutting edge AI interventions that are in classrooms. What kind of led to that move, and what are you doing now?
Yeah. So I think, you know, what led to the move is just a desire to go back to that. Like at the end of the day, I think what matters is what happens in classrooms and what sort of experience and how much learning takes place. We'll kind of, to go back to our conversation about community, what kind of community is built. So we are focused. I mean, I think there are AI enthusiasts who believe it's going to totally transform teaching and learning and take us to a whole new paradigm. That's actually not what we're focused on. We're focused on, we are ready. System leaders, school leaders, teachers, and these high quality materials already have an ambitious vision for the combination of individual work, small group work, full group discussion, the kinds of projects students would be working on, the beautiful text they would read, the background knowledge, vocabulary they would build, the kind of writing they would produce, the peer-to-peer collaboration and discussion and discourse. It's actually quite lovely. It's just very hard to pull off.
Yeah. Yep.
Especially given what we talked about with the diversity of learners and teachers at varying levels of experience. And so what we're doing is trying to help what they already want to have effective and engaging and easier.
Yeah.
And I think that is the right starting point. And part of what when I have the chance to talk to school leaders about their approach to AI, my first question was always like, what are your goals and priorities?
Right.
What's your vision for teaching and learning? As opposed to like, what's our AI strategy? It's like, what's our teaching and learning strategy? And how do we use AI to strategically power that strategy? Two of our partners, the great Scott Langford from Sumner County and Simone Wright from Denver Public Schools, just published a piece in the 74 about this. I think they capture it beautifully.
Yeah.
We're sort of entering the conversation from the wrong place when it's an AI conversation.
Yeah.
And so the biggest thing that's different about what we're doing is we take the curricular materials, the high quality curriculum materials.
HQIM. I'm an ex-Kaplan guy. I like that's an initialism. That's not an acronym because you don't call it a HQIM. It's HQIM, but I've seen that.
HQIM.
Yeah, it's a thing.
And I'm a believer in HQIM. And I think on the ELA side, we are still the only AI tool that's aligning to the tools and taking the text and the tasks that kids are already doing. And as a student said to me, it's like the handout is talking to me. That's fair. That's good. I'm going to use that. We turn something that's like a static workbook or handbook handout into a dynamic interactive experience.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing, is that we're trying to help them realize their existing strategy with these existing materials.
Yeah. And just to jump in quick too, because one of the use cases for AI that I've talked about with folks on the show is like a curatorial one. Like, how do I serve up the right stuff at the right time? How do I find what I actually want? It's a little more in the machine learning space, frankly. I mean, unless it's served up. I know you have we don't want to keep the chatbot in the suspense zone. We want to hear about the chatbot soon enough, Dacia. But there is an element of like, I don't know, serving up the right thing. It's almost like just in time too, like getting it so that you're removing a lot of the layers and the complexity for the teacher to kind of serve the stuff up, but then also ultimately for the learner on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, that will bring us to one of the other game changers, but just to finish the student experience and then go to the teacher side. So on the student side, and I think this is another thing that makes us different, we care a lot about the social experience of learning. And so I think that for most of this sort of 30 years that we've been talking about, the dominant edtech paradigm has been a kid silent, solo, often with headphones, like going down their own personalized pathway. And I'm not saying that never has a role.
Sure.
But as the mother of two teenage boys, like my kids spend more time than I care to admit in that mode.
Yep.
And I think especially in the context of school, we want that social learning experience and the peer interaction. And so we actually built it so that the majority of Mojo activities are done in partners or small groups. And one of the things we're proud of is that teachers say they're more likely to assign partner and small group work because in essence, they know there's like their assistant. We think of Mojo as an AI-powered assistant, is sort of paying attention to what that small group's doing. And then to go to the teacher side, they have real-time visibility into every student's level of not just sort of progress, what question they're on, but their level of understanding of every single question. And so while students are working, teachers can be way more strategic in identifying which kids need their help and what they need their help with, whether it's a motivation issue, an engagement issue, or a confusion, and then what's the nature of that confusion. So teachers feel that they can be more strategic. And then to your point about one of the sort of game changers of the real time is now to go back to that kid's handout metaphor. It's like the teacher can hand all the handouts to that AI-powered teaching assistant and say, tell me right now, what are the two biggest misconceptions in this class?
Right.
What are pull bright spot student work for me so I can do shout outs?
And this is all done through an AR interface. Yeah.
We don't need to go that far. It's on a simple, like the teachers have the dashboard on an iPad or a
Yep.
similar tablet so they can work or move around the classroom.
Mhm.
But it enables them, and this is not like the whole thing's not done by chatbot. It's that now our wonderful teachers have this AI powered teaching assistant to
Yeah.
support kids in the ways they need in the small groups,
Mm.
and then to help the teacher know right now, here's what I need to do.
Right.
Right? Here are the two most common misconceptions, and here are targeted questions to help you facilitate a class discussion that addresses those misconceptions.
Yeah.
Here's your exemplary work. Here's examples of work that have a misconception in them.
Mhm.
And how can you use that as the beginning of a class debate or discussion? Here are
Yeah.
two different arguments the students have made, et cetera.
Mhm.
And so it's a lot of fun because we're basically building what teachers are asking us to build in terms of
Right.
what I would like in this moment. And a lot of what's on the market right now are teacher efficiency tools. And I appreciate a good teacher efficiency tool. Like, who doesn't want to save them time to either make the job more sustainable or to allow them to put their time on things that would be either higher value add? I'm for that. And we do that. There's a bunch of grading and other things that make things easier. But we also care about teacher efficacy. And we're trying to make it so that the teacher is also in those moments when they are leading that class discussion, when they are conferencing with students, when they are analyzing student work and student data. We want them to be more effective in a way that is also more enjoyable.
Right.
Our two big goals are student ELA achievement and teacher retention. Like, how do we
Mhm.
get teachers wanting to do this important work?
And then the chatbot, though, getting to the chatbot, Dacia, there's
Yeah.
a chatbot called Mojo, right? Is that correct? Can we get to know Mojo a little bit? Who is Mojo?
Mojo he was designed by kids. He's a little purple puffball.
Nice.
They want plushies made of Mojo. We have not yet taken that step.
About the on the roadmap, no commitments. Got you.
No commitments on the plushies. But really, Mojo, so if you look at a typical interface, you would have the text that the students are grappling with, and they often also have their hard copy text, but we pulled out the part that they're doing a close read on
Yeah.
for the kinds of activities. And then it's the same questions you would otherwise be asked, but now Mojo is there for each question to say, his move is to affirm and then push.
Yeah.
Good job noticing this, because what we find is
Mhm.
it's not that kids are like super confused. I'm not saying there aren't some kids who are super confused about
Right.
some questions. Yes. And then in that case, Mojo can go all the way back to basics. But it's more that I'm reading this complicated text and I kind of get something about it
Yeah.
when I'm directed to look in detail at these 5 lines of this poem, but I only get the first level.
Right.
And
Mhm.
Mojo says, good job noticing that.
Yeah.
Now, what about this? And sort of
Mhm.
ask the just right scaffolded question. Meanwhile, I don't just have Mojo. I also have my partner or my small group.
Right.
And so kids are talking to each other. And then, like
Mhm.
the handout, Mojo is individual accountability for them. Like, we do want every single student to ultimately write their best thinking. And then
Yeah.
they get this back and forth. And what we find is, students will start what Mojo calls confused but trying.
Mhm.
And then they'll move to partial understanding.
Yeah.
And then they'll move to a full, deep understanding. And not every kid moves all the way on every single question.
Right.
But this sort of 15 or 20 minutes experience that we have with Mojo and with our small group is really a setup for the class discussion.
Yeah.
There often is, a desire to have students grapple on the front end
Right.
with the text. And then they're set up for the class discussion.
You don't have too much time in that sort of screen-based chat interaction mode. You want to get them back in, but if you can be thoughtful about, it's like what I've heard about, high impact tutoring, you want to be thinking about the intervals, how long they are and how they're kind of like integrated into the rest of the experience. Sounds like that's
Exactly.
something that you're thinking about.
Exactly. We want Mojo to play, in terms of direct engagement with students, a limited but powerful role. And we're actually not Mojoizing the whole, that's not a verb, of course, but we're going with it. We don't try to transform the whole lesson. We actually intentionally take the hardest thinking part of the lesson, like the part where there's the trickiest critical thinking that students have to do. And that's the part where we layer in the AI supports for both students and teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And again, they have that extra layer. We're not lowering the rigor of the text or the task. They're getting this extra layer of support and engagement. The teacher's getting real-time visibility. And then it's an alley-oop to the teacher on the class discussion to enable them to be even more targeted and effective in that class discussion. And then Mojo often does come back at the end for the exit ticket or a sort of culminating assessment. And that is done independently. But the difference is students now have multiple rounds of feedback. It's frequently a short writing. And what we know is the number one way to improve your writing is to write, get feedback on it, and then revise your writing.
Yes.
And I remember when I shared that with teachers at Achievement First, they were like, you mean I have to grade everything twice? And it was like almost inconceivable, like this already hard job and the grading that, typical ELA teachers have. It's at some point, it is physically impossible to do what ideally we would do in terms of supporting students with the amount of feedback. So now Mojo gives 3 rounds of individualized feedback and students revise their writing. And we're seeing some very exciting gains in ELA achievement. Frankly, greater gains sooner than I had expected. So we're seeing our students improve by mid-year 5 percentage points compared to district averages of 1 percentage point gain, like 4x, 5x growth. And I've been frankly asking myself, like, what I think is going on here? Because for English language arts, the gaps of background knowledge and vocabulary and at middle school for the kids who didn't master phonics and fluency.
That's the age range you're focused on. There's the first hurdle, which is your 3rd grade reading in particular. As a parent of a 1st grader right now, I'm clearly aware of the fact that folks are very concerned about getting everyone up to standards for 3rd grade. But then beyond 3rd grade, the next major window of assessment is 8th grade. So
there's still annual state testing in most places, but to sort of build on what you're saying, there's Scarborough's rope, which is the science of reading. And the bottom part of it is the foundational skills around phonics, phonemic awareness, fluency. And then the top part of it, which is where we're focused, which is more after 3rd grade. So we're focused in grades 4 through 8. Reading comprehension, writing, vocabulary, background knowledge. So when I think about what is actually producing these significant gains pretty quickly, I think it's kids are giving incrementally additional effort every single question. And it's the combination of affirmation, feedback, support, the clarity of where they are. I mean, we have this notion of partially correct. And so the kids sort of know, okay, look, you're on your way. You got part of it.
Right. Yeah.
Like, now get next. And, one of the greatest compliments we've gotten is from some of the most experienced teachers who say, this is what I would be doing if I could sit with every single student.
Right.
But again, we're in a lot of classrooms that are 25, 30, 32 kids.
Right. It's cool that you can measure the engagement, because that is, I think, the biggest risk now is that kids are just getting disengaged and they don't believe that they can get there. And then they just kind of let go. And that causes that separation that you're talking about. And if they're coming in more varied to begin with, it gets even harder. But this is a place where there's kind of a positive framing of what AI can do for us. It can actually start to intervene around, some of these English language learning and arts. There's like breakthrough technology available today. Where do you see this type of stuff heading? There's still an adoption problem. It's piecemeal. By the time we get evidence-based, randomized controlled trials on the stuff that we're doing today, it'll be years from now, So I think there is some frustration, I guess, in terms of how do you really make this stuff make an impact? But assuming it does, where do you think AI might take us? Where do you see this heading in the future?
There's a lot in your good question. Let me just sort of say, I think most people think AI is ChatGPT or one of its cousin.
I used to be a Claude guy, but now me and Gemini have something going on.
That's our direct experience as consumers, is with these chatbots in that particular format. And I think most of us have found ways to make our lives like way more efficient as a result of using these tools. But I think what's happening now, and we're just at the beginning of it, are products that are powered using AI embedded. And we refer to AI internally as electricity. It's like
Yeah.
you'll have to build the light bulb and the power screwdriver and the vacuum cleaner and all, and you have to bring together different technologies to make those tools increasingly powerful. But now we are working with electricity, whereas before we weren't. And I think in particular, we're freed from a world of multiple choice because what we use the AI for primarily is to evaluate open-ended student responses. You can have a conversation, you can chat, the AI can assess your level of understanding without having to constrain you. It used to have to be rule-based. We had to say you can only do A, B, C, D, E, so we could fill in the decision trees. That's no longer true. The other big game changer is it can analyze large amounts of unstructured data, aka student work in real time. So for any educator principal, we would have these elaborate student work protocols where we'd have to gather all the student work, grade all the student work, try to analyze all the student work. And we spent so many calories on that process that the actual insights and action planning would often get crowded out.
Right.
Now, if the students do, again, for us, a limited but powerful role for the most important part of every lesson, if their student work is captured in the platform, then it can be almost instantly analyzed. I mean, it's a button, and they knew the two most common misconceptions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Button, and it can pull the bright student work based on the region. And so that just allows us to put our thinking work where it belongs, which is on the, like, what are we going to do about it? And there's no time delay. Like, there used to be this horrible time delay between when we went to work and when we were actually able to come up with a plan. So I think ultimately, in terms of where it's going, this could be pretty disruptive for the current assessment process we have, in particular interim assessments, where, you know, we sort of pause instruction for several days to do this standalone assessment, and then we're still sort of limited in what we get back. I think there's a way in which teachers could have much more of a pulse, and for that matter, school leaders and district leaders, on what kids are learning and doing at their fingertips, and therefore what to do about it. They're not learning and doing. So I think that's pretty exciting. But I'm excited for if we approach product development differently. We can talk about that if you want. But I'm excited for the kinds of products that can now be built. And I think we're just at the beginning of that.
Yeah, I've heard that as well, where like the generative wave, it's now multimodal, by the way. So it's like visual stuff and auditory. You can speak things into existence in ways that you weren't really able to do before. But to your point, I think we're just at the point where it's really fully in the field in a mature way. And even then, not every school district has the same kind of resources, connectivity, et cetera. But there are baselines that are relatively high now, and then the implementations will be varied. But it does seem like the top 10% of the interventions that are out there in the field leveraging AI are going to be pretty revelatory. And then the question almost seems like, how do you then distribute that information back and get the adoption when something works? Let's say, you know, Course Mojo demonstrates this huge spike. Like, how do you then get the adoption across the board? How do you start to kind of move to like just the same speed that we're getting with the AI? Can we get that in the adoption across K-12?
There's so much that I think is not ideal about the way the K-12 market operates. And I love a good RCT, but as you pointed out, it can take a long time, and we still should pursue that. I mean, I think that's
for sure.
And,
the gold standard, Dacia.
But I also think, you know, we, as I referenced earlier, we had the pleasure of working in Sumner County. Scott Langford set it up so that we're in 6 schools, a wide variety of schools. 6 schools are using Mojo. 6 schools are not using Mojo. They take the same assessments on the same timeline. And I don't think it's as, you know, rigorous statistically as what an RCT would be, but it's a lot of students. And to the best of their ability, you know, it's not skewed one way or another. And they're using a growth measure, which is really thanks to the state of Tennessee, an individualized student growth measure. And so I think you can set up your own internal pilots and experiments in a lighter lift way that will tell us a lot.
Yeah, it's almost like you need to be at least measuring against some expectations, like have a hypothesis, have a way to measure whether it's right or wrong and have a way to kind of like,
I mean, as long as we have annualized assessments, you can look at year-over-year data.
yeah.
Almost all these systems have some kind of benchmarking that they're doing on a more frequent basis.
Yeah.
You can look at growth over time.
It's a place where, coming at this from my background at Kaplan, there was a lot of like agile software development and agile thinking and like iterative user-based research, product design that were all kind of like foundational to the frameworks that you use and that kind of a culture. It's probably similar frameworks are in play at Course Mojo, but then how that interacts with the way schools think about things and think about structure. It's a place where I've seen in higher ed, Agile's been coming in some interesting ways. I imagine the product research, co-design, user research, that's a pretty foundational part of how y'all roll.
It is the number one way in which I think why we are where we are and why I think we will continue to make really fast progress. We are religious about student and teacher and system leader, but especially student and teacher feedback, guiding and student results, guiding the direction of the product.
Yeah.
And as I said, there are two things we care about, which is students' ELA achievement, which, as we discussed, is a national emergency, and their reading and writing, and then teachers at both their perception of effectiveness and how, to the extent to which we're making their jobs easier and more enjoyable. So those and with those two laser things, we do surveys, but it's nothing like showing up and getting the in-person feedback and seeing the experience. So we are on the ground with our partners all the time.
Yeah.
It's invaluable. Like I stood in the back of a teacher's classroom, hundreds of teachers' classrooms this year with them. And okay, what's working? What's not working? What's frustrating? And I just get so much more out of that experience. And then I can see it. And they're like, oh yeah, this kid last week, come talk to, and you uncovered this insight. And now the kids wait for me. They're like, the Mojo lady's here. And their feedback, great for me in terms of what they want. And they're right.
Yeah.
Made us so much better.
Yeah. And that almost comes full circle back to the origins of Achievement First. It's, building that culture by showing people that you care, and then once that level of curiosity, engagement, and care exists, there's lots of stuff that can kind of be built on top of that, but it's sort of that foundational level of engagement and, stuff that's really been a through line in your career.
Oh, well, that's kind of you to say. It's certainly our values I have, but I think the other thing is, we used to have this saying at Achievement First, actions speak louder than words. So the thing that's really making it so that when I show up, they've got their feedback for me is the last time I was there, that feedback got implemented.
Yeah.
So it's the fast cycle, and it doesn't mean we can do everything all the time. Some things are fast fixes, some things take longer, but it's that we surface pretty clear trends in both what's frustrating students and teachers and in what are the opportunities to delight.
Yeah.
And then we're just systematically acting on them. And the product is getting so much better, faster. A kid said to me, when they score their writing on the quick writes, there's like a simple 3-point rubric, and it says you have a 1 out of 3, you have a 2 out of 3, you have a 3 out of 3.
Yeah. You had me at rubric. Yeah.
The bite-sized piece of actionable feedback, all reflecting good pedagogy. But a kid said to me, like, when I get a 3 out of 3, I want confetti. And I was like, yeah, you should get confetti. But then, of course, our team was like, well, what about, rotating gifts? And so we've got clapping sheep and dancing duck. Like all these things from little movie clips and other things that.
Sticky feedback. Yeah.
It's amazing how much more now kids, I watch them and they stay when the belt to get their 3 out of 3 because they want to see what the gift's going to be.
Right.
And we never would have known that. I mean, a teacher drew our first dashboard on the back of a handout. It was like, this is what I'd like to be able to see.
Yeah.
And the whole analysis function came because a district leader and teachers were saying, I have to click on every single dot to figure out what the kids don't understand and don't understand. Is there a way possible it? And that's just like the breadcrumbs that lead us to develop just a much better product.
Yeah. But then at that foundational level, you actually know what you're measuring, you know what your goals are, you have a process to collect that feedback and to listen. So there's a lot of stuff to kind of tease out from what's working there to kind of have lessons learned for kind of anybody who might be listening. as folks are heading back to the rest of their lives, Dacia, any concluding thoughts, any points of summation you want to put out there before we wrap up?
There are a couple things that I care deeply about. Obviously, we're trying in our own way, geeking out, going deep on middle school ELA to build something special. But I do think this is, to speak more broadly, this is a moment for the sector when we are going to have electricity to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it really depends. We could once again sort of have a level of enthusiasm about edtech that overpromises and underdelivers, or we actually could have significantly better products.
Mm.
And I think I don't have all the answers, that's for sure. But I think we need to be asking ourselves, what's it going to take to get substantially better products? And some of my instincts are, we need to design not for the product, but for the total student and teacher experience that we want. Like you asked me, well, how does this fit in? And so we had Mojo working with small groups for 15 or 20 minutes. And then we have Mojo coming back at the end to do assessment. But we have a whole idea of what, based on the high quality materials, what's happening in that class during that time. And we're looking to still play a supportive role to have the teacher, the parts when the teacher's more in the lead, be equally awesome, if not more so, through Mojo support. And we care a lot about the social experience of learning. Like, what's our vision for excellent instruction? And then how do we strategically use AI to support and power parts of that vision? That's one. And then two is what we were just talking about with the product development process. Frankly, I hope school system leaders are more demanding of the tech providers. I hope they demand more engagement. I hope they ask for, once you visit, please send us your synthesized feedback and your plan for addressing that feedback.
Yeah.
I hope there are more actual co-design sessions. I mean, those are some of the most fun things that we do.
Yeah.
And then I hope, to your point, both in formal research-oriented ways and in informal ways, I hope we're really attending to results and impact.
Amazing stuff here with Dacia Toll, the co-CEO of Course Mojo. Dacia, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
And for our listeners, hopefully you enjoyed what you heard. If you did, please subscribe, write us a review, do all the good things. We'll be back again soon. This is Trending in Education.